The evening lights of the city cast a soft golden glow on the streets, where cars hummed by and people hurried into their favorite restaurants after a long day at work. Among the busiest parts of town stood a grand-looking restaurant with polished windows, a red carpet at the entrance, and valet service for the wealthy who dined there. The restaurant was called the Royal Oak, known for its luxury, fine dining, and an exclusive reputation that made ordinary people think twice before even walking near its doors. It was the kind of place where businessmen held deals, where celebrities stopped by quietly with their families, and where high society gathered to show their wealth. That night, however, something unusual was about to happen. A tall man stepped out of a black SUV across the street. He was broad-shouldered, his presence commanding without effort. Dressed simply in a black hoodie, joggers, and sneakers, he didn't look like the kind of person most would expect to enter such a high-class establishment. His name was Michael Big Shaq Harris. But Big Shaq wasn't just anybody. Unknown to most, he was a silent co-owner of the Royal Oak, a man who had built his fortune in construction, real estate, and later, hospitality. Despite his financial power, he preferred to live humbly, often disguising himself as just another customer to see how people treated him and whether his businesses lived up to the values he demanded. This evening, he wanted nothing more than a quiet dinner, away from the noise of the world. He adjusted his hoodie, pulled the strings tighter against the cool air, and crossed the street. The doorman glanced at him with hesitation. He didn't look like the usual clientele, but the doorman, trained to remain polite, gave a stiff nod and opened the door. The smell of rich spices, butter, and sizzling steaks hit him immediately. The warm golden lights reflected off the polished floors, and classical music played softly in the background. At a corner, a young waiter named Ethan noticed Big Shaq walking in. Ethan had been working at the Royal Oak for almost 2 years. He was sharp, ambitious, but arrogant. He loved flaunting his position at a luxury restaurant, often treating those who didn't look rich enough with subtle insults. To him, people in hoodies, simple clothes, or those who didn't drive expensive cars didn't belong there. He immediately frowned when he saw Big Shaq. Ethan muttered under his breath, "Great, another loss of livery, guy thinking this is a burger joint." Big Shaq, calm and unfazed, walked to the hostess stand. He smiled politely at the young woman standing there. "Good evening," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Table for one, please." The hostess hesitated. She glanced at his outfit, then at Ethan, who was already smirking in the background. Still, she forced a professional smile. "Of course, sir. Right this way." Before she could lead him, Ethan suddenly stepped forward. "Actually," Ethan interrupted, his voice carrying enough sarcasm to be heard by nearby guests, "we're kind of fully booked tonight. Maybe you should try the diner down the street. They serve fries in paper bags. Might be more comfortable for you." A few guests turned their heads, curious. Some laughed quietly, assuming Ethan was right. Big Shaq looked down at the waiter, his calm expression unchanged. His eyes, however, carried a weight that made people uneasy when he stared for too long. The hostess looked embarrassed. "Ethan, that's enough." But Ethan shrugged, not backing down. "I'm just saying, we have a dress code. Hoodies and sneakers? This isn't the place. People come here to experience class. No offense, but," he chuckled, "this isn't a food court." Big Shaq stayed silent. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply looked at Ethan, then at the tables around him. People whispered. Some shook their heads. Others smirked. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "I didn't come here to impress anyone," he said. "I came here to eat." The room grew quiet for a second. Something about the way he spoke carried authority, even though he didn't raise his voice. The hostess, flustered, tried to fix the situation. "Sir, please, we'll find your table." But Ethan interrupted again, louder this time. "No need, Jenna. I'll handle this." He crossed his arms. "Look, man, we have standards here. If I let you sit down, it'll ruin the atmosphere for our paying guests. So, why don't you head out? Try somewhere that matches your style." Big Shaq didn't move. He didn't flinch. His deep brown eyes locked on Ethan, but he said nothing. Instead, he slowly placed his hands in his pockets and let the silence speak. The silence made Ethan nervous. He shifted uncomfortably, but forced a laugh to cover it up. "What? Cat got your tongue." Ethan teased. "Listen, buddy, I don't make the rules. You just don't fit in here." The hostess tried again. "Ethan, please. You can't talk to a guest like this." But Ethan waved her off. "Guest? He's not a guest. He's a mistake." The room was tense now. Guests looked away, some uncomfortable with the cruelty, others entertained by the drama. Big Shaq finally spoke again, his tone calm. "I see." He nodded slowly, as if making a mental note. "Then I'll wait," he said simply. Ethan frowned. "Wait? For what?" Big Shaq's lips curled into the faintest smile. "For the right moment." He turned and walked toward a nearby seat in the lounge area, ignoring Ethan's protests. He sat down comfortably, folding his large frame into the chair like he belonged there more than anyone else. Ethan muttered to the hostess, "Unbelievable. He's really going to sit here? Just wait. I'll have security kick him out." But before Ethan could act, the restaurant manager walked in, a tall woman in a navy suit, sharp eyes scanning the room. She was known for being strict but fair. Her name was Ms. Parker. She noticed the tension immediately. "What's going on here?" Ethan, eager, pointed at Big Shaq. "That guy, he just walked in like this is some fast food joint. No reservation, no dress code, nothing. I told him politely this isn't the place for him, but he insists on staying. He's disturbing the atmosphere." Ms. Parker raised an eyebrow. She turned to look at the man sitting quietly in the lounge. Her expression softened instantly when she recognized him. Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh my God," she whispered. Ethan blinked. "What? You know him?" Ms. Parker straightened her posture, her tone suddenly respectful. "That's not just a customer. That's Mr. Harris." Ethan frowned, confused. "Mr. Harris? Who the heck is that supposed to be?" She looked at Ethan like he had just cursed in church. "The man you just insulted is the majority owner of the Royal Oak." The room went silent. Ethan's jaw dropped. Big Shaq sat back, arms folded, watching quietly as the weight of the revelation sank into the room. Ethan froze in place, his face draining of color as Ms. Parker's words echoed in his ears. "Owner? Did you just say owner?" he stammered. The manager nodded slowly, her tone sharp and cold. "Yes, Mr. Michael Harris. The man you just mocked, insulted, and tried to kick out. He owns his restaurant. In fact, without him, you wouldn't even have a job here." Whispers rippled across the dining hall. Guests who had been entertained by Ethan's cruelty earlier now shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, embarrassed by the way they had laughed along. Some even looked down at their plates, ashamed. Ethan, on the other hand, felt his heart hammering in his chest. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by panic. His throat went dry, and his hands trembled slightly as sweat gathered on his forehead. He turned back toward Big Shaq, who sat calmly in the lounge area, arms folded, eyes fixed on the floor as though he hadn't heard a word. His face was unreadable, but his silence was more terrifying than anger. Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I didn't know. I thought, he came in dressed like..." Ms. Parker cut him off sharply. "Enough. Do you think appearances decide worth? Do you think our guests should be judged by the price of their clothes? You've embarrassed this establishment. You've embarrassed me. And worst of all, you've disrespected the very man who signs your paycheck." Her words landed like blows. Ethan winced, his pride crumbling before everyone's eyes. A nearby guest whispered, "Serves him right, always acting high and mighty with people who don't look rich." Another muttered, "Can you believe that? Insulting the owner himself." The tension in the room was suffocating. No one lifted a fork. No one took a sip of wine. All eyes were on Ethan and the silent man in the lounge. Finally, Big Shaq lifted his gaze. Slowly, calmly, his deep voice filled the air. "Ms. Parker," he said. The manager straightened instantly. "Yes, Mr. Harris." His words were measured, deliberate. Give him a chance to explain. Ethan blinked. His knees nearly buckled from the shock. The man he had just humiliated was giving him a chance to speak? Ms. Parker looked hesitant. Sir, with all due respect, he doesn't deserve. Shaq raised a hand slightly. She fell silent. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice cracking. I didn't know who you were, sir. I swear if I had known. Shaq's eyes narrowed just slightly. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently? The question pierced through Ethan's chest. He wanted to say yes, but he knew it would only dig him deeper. He struggled to find the right words. I mean, I shouldn't have spoken that way to any guest. Not just you. It was unprofessional. I let my attitude get the best of me. His apologies sounded weak, but it was all he could manage. Big Shaq said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched, making Ethan squirm. Finally, Shaq leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Do you know why I come here dressed like this? Ethan shook his head quickly. No, sir. Shaq's voice was calm, but carried weight. Because I don't need clothes to prove who I am. I don't need a suit to tell you I belong here. I built this place not to serve the wealthy, not to show off, but to remind people that respect is the only currency that matters. The words hit Ethan like a hammer. Shaq continued. You looked at me and decided I wasn't worth your time. You didn't care who I was. You cared about what I looked like. That tells me more about you than it does about me. Ethan's lips trembled. He wanted to defend himself, to say something, anything, but he couldn't, because deep down he knew Shaq was right. The manager stood stiffly, waiting for Shaq's verdict. The entire restaurant waited with her. Finally, Shaq leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. For now, he said, I'll let you continue working. Ethan blinked, relief flooding his chest, until Shaq added, but you'll be watched. Closely. Every word, every action. Respect isn't a costume you put on when it's convenient. It's a habit. Either you live it, or you don't belong here. Ethan's relief turned into dread. He nodded furiously. Yes, sir. Understood. Thank you, sir. I swear it won't happen again. Shaq didn't respond. He turned his gaze away, signaling the conversation was over. Ms. Parker stepped in quickly. Mr. Harris, allow me to personally prepare a table for you. Shaq gave a slight nod. That'll be fine. The hostess, Jenna, rushed forward, bowing slightly in apology. Right this way, sir. As Big Shaq rose to his feet and followed her, the entire restaurant watched in silence. Some guests smiled in admiration. Others whispered each other about how calmly and powerfully he had handled the humiliation. His silence had spoken louder than Ethan's insults ever could. But inside Ethan's chest, shame burned like fire. As Shaq sat at his table, waiting for his meal, memories stirred in his mind. His calmness wasn't born overnight. It was forged through years of hardship. He remembered being a young boy, walking into a corner store with his mother. They wore second-hand clothes, their shoes worn out. The cashier had looked at them with disdain, following them around as if they were thieves. Don't touch that, the cashier had barked. His mother had squeezed his hand and whispered, It doesn't matter what they think of us, Michael. What matters is what we think of ourselves. Never forget, respect comes from within. That day, young Michael had promised himself that he would never treat anyone the way his mother had been treated. As the years passed, he worked construction, saved every penny, invested in small real estate projects, and slowly built his empire. He bought the Royal Oak not to flaunt his success, but to create a place where everyone, rich or poor, could be treated with dignity. And yet, tonight proved that even within his own walls, prejudice still existed. He exhaled deeply, the weight of the memory pressing on him. Back in the present, Ethan stood frozen near the wall, sweat dripping down his temple. His colleagues avoided his gaze. He could hear their thoughts without them speaking. You went too far. You might not last here much longer. But for Ethan, this was only the beginning. Big Shaq hadn't fired him. Not yet. But the humiliation, the shame, and the heavy eyes of judgment from everyone in the room. It was almost worse than losing his job. Ethan clenched his fists, swearing silently to himself, I'll prove him wrong. I'll show I'm better than this. I'll make it right. The evening carried on inside the Royal Oak. Glasses clinked, forks scraped lightly against plates, and soft music flowed from the corner where a pianist played. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension still rippled through the staff. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew the arrogant waiter had insulted the very man who kept the restaurant alive. And everyone was waiting to see what Big Shaq would do. At his private table near the window, Big Shaq sat quietly. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, not rushing, not speaking much. His presence alone carried gravity. Guests who walked by glanced at him with subtle respect, though most were too intimidated to approach. The hostess, Jenna, checked on him often, making sure everything was perfect. Ms. Parker, the manager, walked by several times too, silently inspecting Ethan every time she did. As for Ethan, he was a storm trapped inside a body. His pride burned, his guilt gnawed at him, and his mind replayed the moment again and again. The words he had spoken, the look on Shaq's face, the silence that had crushed him more than any outburst could. He wanted to disappear, but he couldn't. He had a shift to finish. And so, with trembling hands and a forced smile, he carried on. Table 7. Ms. Parker ordered curtly, handing him a tray of food. Ethan nodded stiffly and carried the dishes over. His movements were careful now, too careful. Every step felt like a test. Every glance from his co-workers felt like judgment. As he served the food, he forced politeness. "Here you go, ma'am. Enjoy your meal, sir." The guests thanked him, but their eyes lingered a moment longer than usual. They knew. They all knew. Ethan swallowed humiliation like poison and forced himself to keep working. Hours passed. The restaurant remained busy, and the storm inside Ethan's chest grew heavier. Finally, when things quieted slightly, he gathered the courage to approach Shaq's table. He stood a few feet away, clearing his throat softly. "Sir," his voice cracked. He coughed to cover it. "Mr. Harris?" Shaq lifted his gaze slowly, his dark eyes steady, unreadable. I just want to say," Ethan stammered, "that I truly am sorry, not just because of who you are, but because of how I behaved. I let my pride talk for me. I was wrong." The words hung in the air. For a long moment, Shaq didn't respond. He simply looked at Ethan, as if weighing every syllable. Finally, he spoke. "Do you believe respect is only for those who can give something back to you?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "And no, sir." Shaq's tone was calm, steady. "Then why did you strip me of it the moment you thought I was less than you?" Ethan's throat closed. He had no answer. None that didn't make him sound even worse. Shaq leaned back in his chair, silent once again. That silence cut deeper than any insult. Ethan lowered his gaze, shame burning in his face. "I'll do better, sir," he muttered weakly and walked away. What Ethan didn't realize was that Shaq had no intention of firing him that night. The easy option would have been to dismiss him on the spot, and his career at the Royal Oak with a single word. But Shaq wasn't interested in easy. He was interested in lessons. To him, every person deserved a chance to change, no matter how ugly their flaws appeared. But change didn't come from fear of losing a job. It came from confronting the truth about yourself. And so, Shaq watched. He observed Ethan closely as the night continued, noting every slip of arrogance, every forced smile, every genuine effort to be kind. The man was flawed, yes, but he wasn't beyond saving. Not yet. Later that evening, a wealthy businessman and his wife entered the restaurant. They were known regulars, always dressed in designer suits, always demanding the best service. Ethan was assigned to their table. Finally, the businessman huffed as Ethan approached. "We've been waiting too long. Do you people not understand reservations?" Ethan clenched his jaw but forced a smile. "Apologies, sir. What can I get started for you?" The man rattled off his order with impatience, snapping his fingers as though Ethan were a servant, not a waiter. His wife added a list of substitutions that made the order unnecessarily complicated. Ethan wrote it all down, nodding silently. His pride screamed to snap back, to remind them he wasn't beneath them. His humiliation from earlier simmered inside him like boiling water. But then his eyes flickered toward Shaq, who sat across the room. Shaq's gaze was fixed on him, not harsh, not angry, but steady, watching, waiting. The message was clear. This is your test. Ethan swallowed his pride, and forced himself to remain calm. Of course, sir. I'll make sure everything is exactly as you requested. He walked away without letting his frustration spill over. For the first time in a long while, he had chosen restraint. And though it burned, though it clawed at his ego, he felt something unfamiliar stirring inside, a small flicker of growth. Later, as the night drew to a close and the last guest departed, Ethan found himself sweeping near the entrance. He thought he was alone until he heard a deep voice behind him. You did better. Ethan turned sharply. Shaq stood there, his hands in his pockets, watching him with the same calm expression. Ethan swallowed nervously. I tried. Shaq nodded. Restraint isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the greatest strength. Ethan's voice wavered. Why didn't you fire me? Shaq stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow across the floor. Because mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does. Ethan lowered his gaze, his throat tight. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Not a boss, not a mentor, not even a parent. For the first time, he felt something heavier than shame. He felt the weight of responsibility. Shaq clapped a large hand on his shoulder, firm but not unkind. Go home. Think about who you want to be when you walk in tomorrow, because I'll still be watching. Ethan nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Shaq gave a faint smile before walking away into the night, leaving Ethan standing there with more questions than answers, but also a glimmer of hope. The following morning, Ethan stood in front of his mirror, tugging at his tie with trembling hands. His reflection stared back at him. A young man with tired eyes, sharp features, and a storm brewing in his chest. He had barely slept. All night, his mind replayed Shaq's words. Mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does. Those words cut deeper than the humiliation of the night before. They echoed in his skull, louder than any punishment he had ever received. He thought of the way Shaq had looked at him, not with anger, but with a strange kind of patience. It unsettled him. It made him feel exposed, as though someone had peeled back the layers of his arrogance and seen the insecure man underneath. Ethan adjusted his tie one last time, muttering under his breath, Today will be different. Today, I'll prove myself. But proving himself wouldn't be so simple. The Royal Oak bustled with the rhythm of another day. The scent of freshly baked bread and simmering sauces filled the air. Staff rushed about, setting tables, polishing glasses, and preparing for the day's guests. When Ethan walked in, a hush seemed to follow him. His co-workers eyed him warily, whispers trailing in his wake. That's the one, someone murmured. He insulted the owner, another whispered back. He's lucky he still has a job. Their words stung, but Ethan forced himself to keep walking. He wouldn't let them see his shame. Not today. Ms. Parker, the manager, approached him with her usual sternness. Her arms were crossed, her eyes sharp. You're here, she said flatly. Yes, ma'am, Ethan replied, his tone clipped but respectful. You have a lot to prove. I know, Ethan admitted quietly. She studied him for a moment, then handed him a small notepad. Good. Then start proving it. Table 9. Table 9 was occupied by an older woman dressed in a heavy fur coat and sparkling jewelry. She sat alone, her posture stiff, her lips pursed in disapproval, as though nothing in the restaurant could possibly satisfy her. When Ethan approached, she didn't even look at him. What took you so long? She demanded. Ethan swallowed, gripping his notepad tightly. I apologize, ma'am. What can I get started for you? Her eyes flicked up at him, sharp and judgmental. For starters, you can give me a glass of water, with precisely 2 ice cubes. Not 1, not 3, 2. Do you think you can manage that, or is it too complicated? Ethan felt his pride rise like a wave. His tongue burned with the urge to snap back, to remind her he wasn't her servant. But then, across the room, he caught sight of Shaq. The man sat quietly at a corner table, dressed simply as always, sipping tea as he observed everything around him. His gaze flickered toward Ethan, steady, patient, unreadable. The message was clear. This is your test. Ethan inhaled deeply, forcing his pride back down. Of course, ma'am. 2 ice cubes. Right away. The woman sniffed, unimpressed. We'll see. Ethan walked back to the bar, carefully preparing the water exactly as she requested. When he returned, he set the glass gently before her. She peered inside, counting the cubes. 1, 2. For a moment, Ethan thought she might smile, but instead, she sighed dramatically. Finally, competence. She took a sip, then waved her hand dismissively. Now bring me the house salad, but make sure there's no lettuce. I hate lettuce. Ethan blinked. A salad without lettuce? Her eyes narrowed. Do you have trouble understanding English? He bit the inside of his cheek to keep from snapping. No, ma'am. I'll make sure prepared exactly as you like. As he walked away, his fists clenched at his sides. But he forced himself to breathe, to remember Shaq's words. Restraint isn't weakness. When the salad arrived, carefully prepared with spinach, arugula, and other greens but no lettuce, the woman inspected it like a detective. Finally, she nodded slightly. Acceptable. It wasn't praise, but it was enough. And for the first time in his career, Ethan realized he didn't need her approval. He only needed to control himself. Later, during a brief lull in service, Ethan stood near the bar, wiping down glasses. Two fellow waiters, Marcus and Lila, approached him. So, Marcus said with a smirk, you're the new teacher's pet? Huh? Playing humble for the boss now. Ethan stiffened. I'm just doing my job. Lila chuckled. Funny. Yesterday you acted like you owned the place. Today you're acting like a saint. What's the game? There's no game. Ethan snapped, his pride rising again. I'm trying to do better. Marcus rolled his eyes. Sure, we'll see how long that lasts. Their laughter stung, but Ethan stayed quiet. He wanted to defend himself, to prove them wrong with words, but he remembered Shaq's silence, how powerful it had been. So instead of arguing, he simply returned to polishing glasses. That evening, as the last guest trickled out and the staff began cleaning, Shaq approached Ethan. You did better today, he said simply. Ethan looked up, startled. I tried, sir. I really did. Shaq studied him for a moment. Restraint isn't easy, especially when you feel disrespected. Ethan nodded quickly. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Shaq's lips curved into the faintest smile. Good. Growth always feels uncomfortable. Ethan hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at him. Why do you care, sir? You could have fired me. You could have replaced me in an instant. Why give me a chance? Shaq's eyes grew distant, thoughtful. Because someone once gave me a chance. And because respect isn't just something you demand from others. It's something you teach by example. Ethan's chest tightened. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Hope. The next evening, the royal oak glowed beneath its chandeliers, alive with a hum of wealthy voices and the clinking of cutlery. It was Friday, one of the busiest nights of the week, when every table was booked and the staff worked with precision to keep things flowing smoothly. Ethan stood at his station, his notepad in hand, his uniform crisp and spotless. His chest tightened with nerves, but his mind repeated one mantra over and over. Control yourself. Don't let them get to you. For 2 days, he had tried harder than ever before. He had bitten his tongue, forced humility, and treated every guest with patience, even those who tested him. And though the whispers among the staff hadn't stopped, he felt something shifting inside him, a strange strength that came not from arrogance but from restraint. But tonight, the real test would arrive. The doors of the Royal Oak opened, and a man strode in with the confidence of someone who thought the world revolved around him. He was tall, expensively dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth. A gold watch gleamed on his wrist, and his hair was slicked back with precision. His name was Victor Kane, a businessman with a reputation for being ruthless in deals and insufferable in public. The hostess, Jenna, forced a smile as she greeted him. Good evening, Mr. Kane. Welcome back. Victor gave her a dismissive glance, his voice dripping with arrogance. Yes, my usual table. And make it quick. I don't wait. He didn't thank her. He didn't even acknowledge the valet who had parked his luxury car outside. Everywhere Victor went, he carried an air of entitlement, as though people existed only to serve him. Tonight, fate had assigned Ethan as his waiter. Ethan approached the table with careful composure. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you started with something to drink?" Victor didn't look up from his phone. "Sparkling water. Cold, not room temperature, like last time. And bring a slice of lemon. Not lime. Lemon. You got that?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, jotting it down. "And don't take 10 minutes. I don't care how busy you are. I expect service." Ethan forced a polite nod and walked away, gripping his notepad tightly. His pride screamed inside his chest, but he swallowed it down. "Control yourself." He returned quickly with the drink, setting it gently on the table. Victor looked inside the glass. His face soured. "What is this?" "Sparkling water with lemon, sir," Ethan said cautiously. Victor lifted the slice with his fork. "This is thin. Pathetic. Do you think I drink scraps?" "I said a slice, not a sliver." Ethan's chest burned, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Apologies, sir. I'll bring you another." Victor smirked. "You'd better, or I'll make sure your manager hears about it." The evening dragged on with Victor's endless demands. "Too much dressing on this salad. This steak is medium well, not medium. Learn the difference. Why is the bread not warm enough?" Each complaint was louder than the last, designed not just to demand better service, but to humiliate. Other guests turned their heads, watching the spectacle with discomfort. Ethan's co-workers glanced at him with pity. Marcus whispered to Lila, "He's going to crack. Just wait." But Ethan didn't crack. His face remained composed, his tone steady. Each time Victor threw another insult, Ethan answered with respect. Each time Victor mocked him, Ethan replied with patience. Inside, however, he was battling a storm. His pride screamed to explode, to throw the plate back at Victor, to shout loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. But then, every time his composure wavered, his eyes flicked across the room, where Shaq sat quietly in his usual corner. Shaq's gaze was calm, steady, silent. And somehow, that silence anchored Ethan. Restraint isn't weakness, he reminded himself. As Ethan set down the main course, a beautifully plated steak, Victor sneered. "You know, you're not cut out for this job. You're sloppy, slow, and clueless. People like you should be bussing tables at a diner, not working in a place like this." The insult stabbed deep. Ethan froze, his pride trembling on the edge of eruption. His fists tightened at his sides. His chest heaved. For a split second, the old Ethan returned, the arrogant, prideful waiter who mocked guests and thought himself superior. The urge to snap back was overwhelming. But then, he saw Shaq. Shaq's eyes were fixed on him, steady, patient, waiting. And in that moment, Ethan remembered everything. The humiliation, the shame, the lessons, the silence. He unclenched his fists. His shoulders relaxed. And he forced himself to bow his head slightly. "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir," he said softly. "I'll do everything I can to make your experience better." Victor scoffed. "Pathetic, but at least you're learning your place." He turned back to his meal, dismissing Ethan like a servant. Ethan walked away slowly, his heart pounding, but his composure intact. When the night finally ended and Victor left in his cloud of arrogance, Shaq rose from his table. He walked calmly toward Ethan, who stood near the bar, exhausted and pale. Shaq's voice was low but firm. "You wanted to fight him?" Ethan nodded, shame filling his chest. "Yes, sir, every second." "But you didn't." "No, sir." Shaq's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good. You passed." Ethan blinked, confused. "Pass?" Shaq nodded. That was the hardest test. Not because of what he said, but because of what he wanted to say back. Restraint isn't silence. Restraint is power. Tonight, you proved you have it. Ethan's throat tightened. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, sir. I don't deserve your patience." Shaq shook his head slowly. Patience isn't given to those who deserve it. It's given to those who need it most. For the first time, Ethan felt something break inside him. Not his pride, but the wall he built around himself for years. And in its place, something new began to grow. Thanks for watching and subscribe my channel.